what is it that we should be looking for in the end time as signs of the end time? So let's go ahead and begin today's message in Matthew 16. Matthew 16 verses 1 through 3. And we see that this is indeed something that we are to be doing. Matthew 16, beginning in verse 1. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and testing him, asked that he should show them a sign from heaven. And I can imagine, see where the Pharisees and Sadducees are coming from. They want to say, hey, give us a sign. And then they're going to, test that sign. And they're going to try to obviously make sure that it would fail and that it would not come to pass. But that's where how they were looking to disprove Christ and what Christ was doing and what he was saying. But he answered them and said, when it is in the evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And I haven't looked to see the etymology of that, but it does remind me of, red in the morning, sailor take warning. It's discerning the skies and what the weather was going to be like for sailing. And if it was red in the morning, like he's saying here, if the sky's red, then, it's going to be, fair weather. Or if it's in the evening, it's fair weather. It's, what's the one at night? Sailor's delight. So anyway, and in the morning it'll be foul weather today, for the sky is red and the threatening hypocrites, he calls them. You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. So they were there for them to see. He did not need to do anything special. And that can be an admonition to us as well. In what are we doing? What do we need to, be faithful, to know that what we read in the Bible is true and what God is saying is correct? Well, we have plenty to do it. And there are signs of the times that are around us, even more so today, in terms of what the events are going to be that precede the coming of Christ. Let's begin turning over to Matthew 24, just a few chapters over, to find what is Christ's longest prophecy in the Bible, in the New Testament, during his lifetime, we should say, because he inspired the other ones. But nonetheless, this is all basically that he had to say prophetically, or is the largest volume of it anyway, in terms of what it was. And so I think another lesson we can take from that too is that in terms of what are we supposed to be doing now, you look at the portion of prophecy and then you look at the other portion of Christian living that is in the Bible, and to me that can direct our attention. But that's not to say that this goes undone. So let's go ahead and begin, and to a certain degree Matthew 24, and you can use this in the future as an outline of things that you're supposed to be watching for specifically in the end time. Verse 1, then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Verse 3, now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, so either there was already this, it was already set that the apostles or the disciples at the time just didn't come and ask him when he said these things in front of everybody, because they knew that he wasn't going to tell them anyway, because it wasn't for everybody to know. But they came to him privately a little bit later and said, tell us. You can imagine them going, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So what are these things? So this is what Christ is addressing here. Verse 4, and Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, because you can be deceived. A warning to us. And it's a very pertinent warning right now in terms of all the volume of information that is currently out there, and people saying this, that, and the other thing, as within the Church of God, the greater Church of God, or within the world. There are things that are going to be said that can and will deceive people who are not on track. Verse 5, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Hold your finger here for 1 second if you want. Well, tell you what, I'll just read it for you. In Luke 21, verse 9, it's just a parallel verse. But it says, the end will not come immediately. But go ahead and put your finger there, or turn back to 24, Matthew 24, and just skip down to verse 33. And he just says, see you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the door. Assuredly, I say to you that this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. So he's telling us, again, a timing for all this stuff, that when we have the false Christ, when you hear of the wars and rumors of wars, that don't be troubled, because it's not yet. The end is not immediately coming, but I want you to also know that the generation that's living at that time will not pass before they all do come to pass. So we keep that in mind as we, read this, as we go in the future, as we think about these things and what's going to transpire. But then it says in verse 7, Matthew 24, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. So it's just getting started. And what we see here, though, is that Christ is giving us a little outline of what he was to later to reveal to John in Revelation. Let's turn there to Revelation 6. And it's the first 4 seals is what this little outline that Christ is giving in a quick, point by point synopsis is alluding to. And he goes further in depth in Revelation 6. And again, we'll go through it fairly quickly. And the purpose of today is not to go and prove everything that I'm going to say in terms of the king of the north. It's like, how do you know that this is Assyria, or that this is King Jareb, or that this is Assyria or Germany? Well, we've talked about some of these things more extensively in the past, and they're on the website. But the point is to show, because I think we all have a good idea of these things, is to show what we need to be looking at and towards. So Revelation 6 in verse 1 says, now when I saw the Lamb open one of the seals, I heard the 4 living creatures saying with a voice of thunder, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. People confuse the white horse because the white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow and a crown, was given to him with Christ, because Christ is going to come on a white horse, but he's going to have a sword. And so what we see here is the first seal that's opened is false religion. Plus we know that Christ doesn't return on the scene until this is the 7 seals, then you have the 7 trumpets, and then that's when Christ comes on the scene. So this is too early at this point. Next, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, come and see, and another horse, fiery red, went out, and he was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth. So he's taking peace from the earth, and because of that, the people should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. So he's taking peace, but the people go at each other. And this is war. And of course, this is what Christ was talking. He said, don't believe anybody because I'm the Christ, and then it's wars. And then he says, the third seal in verse 5, I heard the living creatures say, come and see, and I looked, and behold, a black horse. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. I heard the voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. So things are getting thinned. Basically, this is a day's wage to get a quart of wheat. So imagine in your mind just how bad the times are. And then barley, which was not as expensive, still you could get 3 quarts and at least get a little more of a full feeling for the same amount. But nonetheless, we're still talking about a time of famine. And then verse 7, when he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death. And Hades, or the grave, followed with him. And power was given to them, over a 4th of the earth, to kill with the sword. So initially, they just took peace away. Now they're going out with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. So these are the first 4 seals, the things that we actually are seeing going on around us right now to a certain degree. But what I would tell you to look out for and to expect is that these things will grow in intensity and culminate, towards the end. They're going to continue to go throughout the rest of the opening of the seals. But what we're having now at this point is that they continue to get worse and worse, because I think we look around and we're going, well, if the 4 seals are open, it ain't so bad. We're looking around, we're going, yeah, I see a little bit of this, that, and the other thing, that's going on right here, going on around. But hey, I'm living a good life, and I'm meeting here in peace and comfort and safety, freedom. And so, it can't possibly be that bad. Well, brethren, do not be mistaken. Continue to watch for these things, as they will continue to get worse. And it tends to be that these, one seal begets another seal, that after one comes another because of the first, often. So they continue, and if it's going to be a cycle going round and round and round, we can expect things to become much more difficult. Now, those are things that are kind of happening at this point in time. Today, I'd like to talk about the things that we can watch for that are going to happen before it's too late. If you understand what I mean, there's some stuff that's going to be happening way down the road that by the time, if you, well, I know what's going to happen then, well, that's good. Hopefully you're in the place of safety by then. If not, then it's going to be to a certain degree moot point, but you're going to be able to, if you have a Bible, be able to follow along as these things are happening, not only to the rest of the world, but to you if you're not in the place of safety. So the other thing that I'd like to emphasize as well is that I want to watch for things that we can indeed watch for, right? There are things that are going to happen that they're just going to happen out of the blue, and you're not going to see them coming, all right? So yeah, we look back, and if I look back in the seals and the trumpets and whatnot, a third of the trees are going to be destroyed. That's just, it's going to happen, and it's just going to happen, real quick. And a third of the sea creatures, these are the types of things you're not really going to see coming, except for the fact that these things are transpiring in a chronological order as they're laid out in Revelation. Of course, we've gone through a lot of these things before in different messages talking about the seals, the trumpets, and the plagues. But there will be a few of them that we do bring up because we are to be watching, and we will see these things start to coalesce even now. Some things that are going to happen well into the process, well down the road, and you're going to say, okay, well, I can see that part of the end is now starting to form. So back to the 5th seal, verse 9. The 5th seal, which is the Great Tribulation, as we call it, has not happened yet. All right, so this is one of the things that that's going to happen in the future. Verse 9, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they had. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And of course, they're speaking, this is speaking metaphorically, because there is no resurrection at this point in time. So again, it's the figurative speaking of these people who had been slain. But then verse 11, there's a white robe given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren would be killed was completed. Back to Matthew 24 and verse 9. Again, we're going to go back to the parallel account, and so again, please continue to keep your finger there. And we know that Christ, we'll go ahead and read the Great Tribulation, the 5th seal, while we're there. But let's go back to Matthew 24. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. So what is coming is this great tribulation, a time of Jacob's trouble, a time that has never been before and never will be again, on physical Israel as well as spiritual Israel. Luke 21:12, I'll read that one for you. Again, the parallel scripture. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. So we see this time that is going to be coming, a great tribulation. And one of the main forces that's going to bring about the tribulation on the world, as well as those in the church that have not gone to the place of safety, is what we call the beast power. The beast, which is going to be the revival of the Holy Roman Empire, the final revival, as I mentioned, is mentioned by several different names. Nonetheless, the beast can refer to the individual that is going to be leading this power, as well as to the system, the power itself. And we're looking to a Germanic-led United States of Europe. So there's going to be this coalition of 10 nations or groups of nations or blocks. They're going to come together under this one leader. And so when we look at the news, we're looking over towards Europe. And again, I didn't look it up. I meant to, but again, I have so much information here that I'm not even sure I'm going to get through it today. But we've been saying this since after World War II. This is not something new that is being said. This is what God has revealed through his word to, at that time, Mr. Armstrong, and has been carried on by faithful ministers and church members ever since then. So what we have is that, again, this is nothing new that we're saying, yet now people are looking at it and they can now see these things happening in the world. And we can see them happening, and we can know too that as the final resurrection transpires, that this indeed is the end time, and the great tribulation is just around the corner, because we are now seeing the formation of this beast power, this nation. And as we watch the news and we see what's happening, they have their treaties, and then people start getting together, nations get together, and then they have a currency, and then they have a currency zone. And we're starting to see these things. And even in one of the most recent articles that went out just this week in the Signs of Times, is that people are referring to this group that's forming, that was initially started for what they thought was just kind of decent economic reasons and trade reasons, has turned into and is quickly becoming exactly what the Bible is prophesying, and exactly what we've been talking about for, how many years does that go back to, post World War II, 80? So this is finally starting to happen, and it just as it was prophesied. If you want to ever go back, you can go and look at Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Revelation 13, Revelation 17. Those 5 chapters mainly, and you can try to orient, and maybe we can put together something in the future to show how these things are oriented. But it goes through all these world ruling empires, from the time of the Babylonians until the return of Christ. And in this final one, we're going to have, and this is the final 10 toes, a political power. They give their power, as it were, to the beast. They give up this national sovereignty that they have. And again, you can look at what's going on, and there are people perhaps like France who don't want to give up that. Italy, they want to be their own person, and they're not willing to do this. And they're not the only countries. They're, to me, the ones that are top of mind to me that act that way. But what we're going to see are these 10 nations. So right now, within the larger Euro, the EU, what are they at? 28 members now? 28 member states. But within there, you have the Eurozone, the ones who are just using the euro. I think that's at 17 now. It's not 10. But we're looking at what is it going to take? What's going to happen? How is this going to come about? But we're already at 17. And to me, it's a little bit easier to get rid of a few than it is to add some, to convince them. But nonetheless, we have this end time beast power. There's going to be this political power. It's also going to be an economic power. In Ezekiel 27, I'm not even going to turn there because, again, go through it and look and see. And it's talking about Tyre there, which is a symbol of the Babylonian system. And it talks about all the people that it's going to be doing business with. So even Ephraim will be doing business, and Israel will be doing business with the beast power because they're an economic power. And we see this, if you go and look, and I have looked just on, I think it was the GDP on Wikipedia some time back, and it puts the EU as a group, all right, in their list of, what's the GDP of nations. And they're up there. They're either number one, which they are on most of the list, or number two. So they're number one or number two, and they're already there, and they're not even to the point that it's being talked about here in Ezekiel 27. They are going to be a military power. Revelation 13:4 says, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" All right. So he is going to be a military power as well. So whenever we start looking at these articles, and I think one came out a couple weeks ago that was talking about the need with all these immigrants to form some type of military group so that they can start policing these things. And it was an EU. And I've heard some people say, well, it would take them way too long to, it's going to be another 4 or 5 years at least or more before you can form an army. I'm going, well, I don't see it that way. I see that they all have standing armies individually, and they decide to go collectively. Eurozone, or the EU, will have probably the second largest after China standing military in the world, if you take what they have right now. And Germany is one of the leading arms dealers. So what we look for and what we're looking at is this rise of this political, economic, military system in Europe. And that's what we're looking at, saying, okay, what's leading to that? Because the beast power is going to play a major role in this fifth seal, the Great Tribulation, which will affect us as church members or the United States as well. Now, in addition to those things, okay, you're going to have this rise of this, as we call them, charismatic leaders, who's going to be a Hitler type. Again, I say a Hitler type in the way of the beast here, because you look at what Hitler did as, we look at him being the ninth resurrection of the Roman Empire, and he was this, right? He brought an economy to Germany. He brought a military to Germany, and he still tried to unite them as well, and he wanted to unite others, and they didn't want to necessarily be with him, but it was not the final one. So we're looking for this leader, but he's not the only part. It's kind of like a two-part equation, because there's going to be a religious aspect to the beast power. All right, so we're looking for the false prophet to come and to rule with the beast power, making this beast power not only economic, political, military, but religious as well. And this is, again, I won't get into all the other nomenclature that we use, but we look at the false prophet as being the Pope for reasons, as well as, we can look at the past history as well. But turn over to 2 Thessalonians 2, and we'll look at the power of the false prophet, at what's going to happen in the future. So we need to be ready for this. We need to be looking at, and again, we're looking at every pope that comes and going, okay, could this be the one? Could this be the one that's going to fulfill this final role? Does he have that attitude, or that proclivity, or that nature to head in that direction? But notice what he's going to be able to do in 2 Thessalonians 2, and we'll begin in verse 9 and read down to 12. It says, "The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders." So he will be doing signs, kind of like the signs that the Pharisees and Sadducees wanted Christ to do. And Christ said, I'm not going to do those. I'm only going to give you one sign of who I am. But this one, this false prophet's going to be doing all kinds of signs. And people will not be able to help but believe that the Pope is going to be, a instrument of Christ, if not Christ, because he will be pretending to speak on behalf of Christ. And you're going, well, who else has that kind of power? And especially considering he's already in the office of what most people look to as the spiritual leader of the Christian world. Everybody looks to him. Who's the other spiritual leader of the Christian world? The so-called professing Christian world. You go, well, Pope. Pope's the only one that anybody even talks to. Who's the head of the Protestants, Episcopalians, Methodists, and all these things? I don't know. Everybody knows the Pope, though. And everybody kind of goes to the Pope. And verse 10, it says, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. So those ones who are not being saved right now are going to fall for this unrighteous deception because they did not love the truth. And that's another category that we cannot afford to fall into if we expect to be able to see these things. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie. So these things are going to be happening, and they're going to go, that's it. I cannot see anything else. That is the man. And I say that, and you look around right now, what is everyone saying about whatever? There's a lot of people say specifically about this time of the year right now, okay, with the Shemitah and the blood moons. And it's like, it's not just people in the church, it's people outside of the church. Do you think, according to this scripture, that they can see the truth? Or are they going to fall for a falsehood? Well, it's pretty plain right here what's going to happen. That they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. It's a prerequisite to understanding, is having the truth, living that way of life, having God work with you and not against you, as will happen in the end time. Back to Matthew 24 and verse 11. Again, we're going to see that he's not the only one that's doing this. Again, he's the main one doing this. But Christ is saying, then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. Now, this is going to be the work against Christ, right? The work of Antichrist. It's going to be that one, that spirit that exists in the end, the one that is against keeping the commandments, as it said, the lawless one, as he is, the one that's going to change times and seasons and whatnot. And he's going to be against what the Word of God is and what it says. And we have to know what that is so that we are not deceived. We have to have that love of the truth. Now, the other thing that we look at too, and I keep talking about us, about the United States, but we're looking towards the downfall of Israel and Judah as prophesied in the Bible. So Israel, so let's just cover this real quick. Israel, archaeologically, historically, and by the scriptures, has long been shown to be the United States and the British Commonwealth of nations. When I say the British Commonwealth, for me, that immediately connotes this dotted countries all around the world where the sun never set, because they are part of that commonwealth of the British Empire. So whether it's South Africa, or it was Hong Kong at one time, or Australia, New Zealand, etc., they are part of that. That is who modern day Israel is. So whenever we look at prophecy, we look at prophecies towards Israel or the house of Israel. And again, you have to be discerning and look at it. We're not going to get into all that as well. But sometimes Israel refers to everyone, sometimes it refers to just the house of Israel. And then we have Judah. All right. So modern day Judah refers to the country and the people of Israel. Okay. Now you can see why people get confused, right? So modern day Israel, the state of Israel, which only quote unquote came into being in 1948, is the land of Judah, where Judah was. So Judah went let me go back. Israel went into captivity, right, with the Assyrians, and went out of captivity, but they dispersed and they scattered, never went back to Jerusalem. All right, that's a key to understanding prophecy as well. Judah, captured by the Babylonians, went back 70 years later to Jerusalem and have remained there, and scattered as well around the world. But when the Bible talks about Israel or talks about Judah, that's who it's talking about. The lost 10 tribes who have settled mostly in Europe, okay? But the main ones, Ephraim and Manasseh, are the British Commonwealth and the U.S. So whenever we look, we're looking to see what God says about Judah and Israel. And one thing it does say, we find in Isaiah 11. Let's turn to Isaiah 11:11 and 11:12. We see that there is a coming captivity of both of these peoples, Israel and Judah. Isaiah 11 and verse 11. It shall come to pass in that day. Okay? A phrase that always talks about the day of the Lord at the time of the end. That the Lord shall set his hand again, all right, note again, the second time, to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, which is in Babylon, and from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, and he will assemble the outcasts of Israel, which never happened, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So to me, this is one of the more succinct scriptures that talks about that he's going to gather them again from Assyria. Well, they left Assyria and they scattered, proverbially to the four winds, right? And we followed and we've tracked them. But nonetheless, he's saying he's going to have to go again a second time. Assyria will take them into captivity again, and Assyria is modern day Germany. And it's going to be this modern day Germanic leader leading the beast power that is going to do this, is going to bring this on the people of Israel and Judah. So we are looking for things and for relationships to happen and events to take place that lead us to see that this is about to happen, about to take place. One of the main places that we can see how Israel and Judah have fallen down is in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. Leviticus 26, if you want to turn there, we'll read a few verses. But God laid down the choice between blessings and cursings based on the way that the people acted, whether they were going to follow God's ways or not. And he laid this out long before they were ever divided into two nations. So he had a covenant with the Israelites, back in Exodus 31 about the Sabbath, and it was a sign, of who his people were, and that they would be, his people, and he would be their God. But beginning in Leviticus 26 and verse 1, he references a couple things here that they're going to need to do. Otherwise, there will be cursings that follow. It says, you shall not make idols for yourself. Neither a carved image nor a sacred pillar shall you rear up for yourselves, nor shall you set up an engraved stone in your land to bow down to it. So no idols to bow down to, because I am the Lord your God. Verse 2, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. So in this offering the following, the promises for obedience, and then there were going to be punishments for rebellion. This is one of these keys to prophecy and to what was happening or what's going to happen. And these two commandments, idolatry and Sabbath, are mentioned here prominently. And honestly, if you look at idolatry, idolatry is basically breaking any of the commandments of God. It's putting anything before God. It's not just necessarily engraving a little carved item or out of wood or stone or gold, which has got to be one of the most ridiculous things that you can think of. I'm going to go pick up a stone, I'm going to make a little god, and I'm going to bow down to that. Yet, people did that, but they've gone on in terms of the spirit of what is meant by idolatry. So they are not following the commandments of God, and they're not keeping the Sabbaths, right? Not just the Sabbath day, but the high Sabbaths. Trumpets, which we just kept, and, atonement and tabernacles and last great day that are coming up. But he goes in verse 3, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them. So if you do these things, then he goes through, the next 10 verses or so telling what's going to happen, the blessings that come. And then 14 to 33, what's going to happen if they refuse to obey them. And Deuteronomy 15 or 28 is basically the same thing. Let's turn over to Deuteronomy 28. I just want to emphasize it there, both places, or what we call the blessings and cursings chapters. And note again in Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15 what they say. What is being said here by God to the people that they need to do, and what's going to happen if they don't do it. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and take you. So in looking and watching, as we see what's transpiring in the world, these are some of the things that connote this downfall of the nations of Israel and Judah, the nations of the United States, the British Commonwealth, and Israel specifically. What's going to happen? The produce and the animals of the land are not going to yield as they should. There's going to be drought. Okay? It's God who gives the rain in due season, and he's not going to give it then. So we're looking for these things to begin to happen. We're starting to see droughts in various places, and extreme droughts, in certain states. And those are some of the greater producing areas of the United States. We're going to see sickness and disease. And this is why we highlight some of these things sometimes in the Signs of the Times newsletter. If it's not already obvious what is happening in the United States to bring about these things. They're not following God or his commandments or keeping his Sabbaths. And because of that, sickness and disease is going to come such that there is no healing for it. There's no cures for it. Does that bring anything to mind? I mean, it seems like we have some of these things. I mean, HIV, until recently, I don't even think that they were able to abate it, to allow the person to live, out the rest of their life via medicine. Not that they actually cured it, I don't think, but nonetheless, I've seen some of these guys before. I remember one coming into an office I worked in, covered from head to toe in sores. See if that's in your Bible. If they say that in Deuteronomy 28. And there's going to be pestilences and plagues. Our efforts to produce and to be successful in any way is going to be fruitless. And then there's going to be strangers that come within our borders. And they're going to take our property. They're going to subjugate us financially. Are those things happening? That is why we bring out certain articles. And we see, what's one of the biggest issues right now in this present presidential campaign? Is it not immigration? These people, again, that's like verse 43, where it's talking about the foreigner within that's going to rise up above you. Is that happening? Yes. It's a reason for it, because we're not following God, and it's a cursing that comes upon us because of this disobedience. And then finally, it's going to come down to the final cursing is going to be war that's going to come upon us. And occupation. And we're going to see all these things precede this. And then finally, and even here in Deuteronomy 28, it talks about a captivity. And that captivity is going to come upon Judah and Israel for a reason, for a cause. See it in verse 45. What does that cause? Deuteronomy 28 and verse 45. Moreover, all these curses, everything we were just talking about, I was summarizing it, shall come upon you and pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. That's why we highlight some of these things, brethren, is to show the signs of the times, as well as to kind of light a fire under us as well, and to say, I better not be that way. I know different. I'm reading this. I understand exactly what it means. I cannot afford to fall into the same trap that all these others, these ungodly, are. So when we look at the end time, we look for these Christian living principles. In fact, let's turn over to 2 Timothy 3. It tells us what the attitudes are going to be. The wrong attitudes in the end time. Tell me if you see these. You know, it's in some of the articles that we read. It's in the people that live around us. It's the people that sometimes we're forced to work with at our job. 2 Timothy 3 and verse 1. And verse 7, through 1 through 7. 2 Timothy 3. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be, and now it's going to list this litany of characteristics and attitudes, these wrongful attitudes, these disobedient ones to God and to his word, of the way it's going to be. And tell me if this is the time that we're living in or not. Women will be lovers of themselves, selfish, lovers of money. You know, what's the the almighty green dollar, the almighty dollar. You know, that's what it seems like motivates most everybody these days, in the U.S. I should say. Boasters, proud, blasphemers, you know, blaspheming against God. How much is that going on these days? You know, I have several categories that I try to categorize all these end time things that we're watching into. You know, I should probably make a category for all of these, you know, because they're all different and they're all happening. But again, I think we can see this and understand that, you know, maybe we just put a category of end time attitudes here, but they're disobedient to parents. You know, I was just talking about that with somebody last night. Unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. You know, how hard is that? You know, people just don't like what's right and what's godly. It's happening all the time. Traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure. You know, we'd rather be doing those things than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, saying I'm a Christian, but denying its power. From such people turn away. For of this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. If you're like this is not who God's going to reveal things to. Right? You have to have the truth. And these people will not have it. And the great tribulation will come upon them for cause, for a reason. But it's not just within physical Israel, it's also spiritual Israel. Turn back to Matthew 24 and verse 12. Matthew 24 and verse 12. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. The word here for love is agape, which is a spiritual love, which only God's chosen can have, the ones who have been baptized and received his Holy Spirit and become like him, and God is love. Only they can have this type of love. And it's their love that is growing cold. Because of lawlessness paralleling the world and the lawlessness of the world, they too will grow cold. They will become lawless and grow cold. And it makes me kind of wonder if if you're hot and you start growing cold, that if you don't stop right there in the middle, if you're just not lukewarm. So the point of all this is that we look at the condition of Israel and Judah to see where we are. All right, it's not to necessarily be casting stones, even though God says, rise up, lift up your voice like a trumpet and tell my people their sins. That goes for the United States and British Commonwealth and Israel as well as the Church of God. But nonetheless, these things are going to happen, and they are happening, and we're seeing them increase, and we're seeing these things one by one come to fruition. So we know that it's going to be that we're moving towards the end time. We're getting closer and closer as we see not only this, but we see the formation of this beast power that's going to rain terror on Israel and Judah, as well as other nations. Now, initially, the king of the north, as it were, is going to be in this confederation with these people of the south. Let's turn to Psalm 83. Psalm 83, verses 4 through 8. An interesting place to find a prophecy. We don't normally think of Psalms as being a prophetic book. We have this prophecy here for the end time about a confederation of nations, currently Muslim nations, that are going to work with Assyria or Germany or the king of the north or the beast power, all the same. So what we see here, and we're going in a direction here, so bear with me, but Psalm 83 and verse 4, it says, "They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more." So that's their mission statement for this confederation. It says, "For they have consulted together with one consent, they form a confederacy against you. The tents of Edom," which is Turkey, "and the Ishmaelites," which is Saudi Arabia, "Moab," which is part of Jordan and kind of western Iraq, and the Hagrites, which is mainly Syria, Gabal, which is Lebanon, Ammon, which is Jordan and part of the PLO, and Amalek, which is, again, the PLO, Philistia, which is the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip area, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Again, Tyre is this end-time Babylonian system. Again, we were talking about that in Ezekiel 27, so keep that in mind. Assyria, in verse 8, has also joined with them, that they have helped the children of Lot. Of course, the children of Lot are Moab and Ammon, so basically Jordan. So what we're seeing here is this confederation, this consent. They're all working together. There are these, what we call, mostly Muslim nations, are all working together with the beast power to do this against Israel. So that's something else we're going to look for. If you want, go pull out a map, look at where all these are, look at what's happening now, and there are some interesting things that are happening at this point in time right now with Iran. Iran being Shia Muslim, and pretty much everybody else Sunni. All these people now, Iran getting nuclear weapons, getting their money released, getting their oil. They're already the largest state-run terror group in the world, and they're causing problems. If you know where Saudi Arabia is, just to the south and kind of the southwest or west-southwest is Yemen, and now they're getting in there, and it's causing all kind of consternation for Saudi Arabia and these other nations. Could that be what precipitates it? Well, don't know for sure, but we need to keep watching to see what's going to happen. And then when we see Assyria has joined them, then we know what's happening, right? But it's not all going to be, good times for the beast, as it were. They're going to get pushed back at, right? If we look at Daniel 11, 40, and let me see where we're at here on time. I think we might have time to go there. Let's go ahead and go to Daniel 11 and verse 40. And we'll see that this king of the south, again, another confederation of nations, not necessarily the ones that we just read, but another one. And again, they're going to come and they're going to be kind of a thorn in the side. While things are all, the point is, going well, and don't let that fool you is what I'm saying, is that there has to be this confederation. But it looks like, and it appears very much, that there will be another fulfillment of the king of the south, because there was already a partial fulfillment before, during the ninth resurrection. So at the time of the end, in Daniel 11:40, the king of the south shall attack him, it says in the New King James Version. It says push in other, like the King James Version. And that word means to gore or to butt with horns. In fact, when I looked it up, you rarely find this word push without the word horn in the actual sentence. So it's kind of a goring or a butting or a pushing, but it means attack. As again, if you want to put Daniel 8:4 in your notes, it says, I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, which was, again, a direct prophecy of what was to happen when they did attack and take over other areas. So we can be pretty certain that the word attack is the right word, and it's what push means. But it says the king of the south will push at or attack the king of the north. And then what's the king of the north do? He comes against him, the south, king of the south, like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, so several countries, overwhelm them and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, Jerusalem, verse 41. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. Okay, and those are some of the ones that were listed previously in chapter 83 of Psalms. And then the king of the north shall stretch out his hand against these countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So we're seeing some more things that are going to happen. And then he shall have power over the treasures of gold and over the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. So we didn't talk about those guys before, which can lead us to believe that the king of the south is not going to be that same exact group, though it may comprise some of the same people. But these people then end up being obedient to him. So the point of this is that there's going to be things happening in what we talk about, the king of the south, the direction from the Jerusalem area. And these things are going to happen. One of the reasons we keep our eye on the Middle East and the things that are going on, because of all this interaction that will take place in the future. Can we see it beginning to happen? Can we see these nations starting to come together, or why they might come together? Again, at the time that all this is happening, we hope not to be around there. We hope to be in a place of safety, right? But it may not be. Nonetheless, we will know the times that we're in when we start to see a lot of these things transpire. In fact, there's a lot of stuff that's happening, and a lot of these things are transpiring. So that's why we're led to believe that we are indeed in the end time. So in Daniel 11:44, it says, "But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore, he shall go out with the fury to destroy and annihilate many." Now, of course, to the east and to the north is the Asiatic hordes. Now, if you want to, we can probably go through it later, but on your own, you might want to go through the fifth trumpet and the first woe, as well as the sixth trumpet and the second woe, which are found in Revelation 9, verses 1 through 21. You can go back and have a look at what is going to transpire during that time. But what we need to be looking at right now is what is going on, how are things forming. If there was nobody over there, if there was nothing happening, then we go, okay, well, this isn't the time. But we see things happening between Russia and Eastern Europe. We see things happening in China. And of course, those two will be working together. That is what we need to be looking at and focusing on in terms of our watch, and seeing that we indeed are in the end times. So, brethren, if you would, in conclusion, let's turn to Hebrews 9 and verse 28. Hebrews 9 and verse 28, and let's find what we are to be doing, how we are to be waiting. Hebrews 9, verse 28, and again, we break into a thought here, and pretty much the first sentence is not what we're looking at and focusing on, but it says, so Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. Now, to those who, what? To those who eagerly wait for him, he will appear a second time, apart from sin for salvation. So how is it then that we are to be waiting? What is it that we are to be doing? We're to be anticipating his return, expecting it. We're to be looking for it. We're to be watching. We're to be discerning the signs of the times. Now, one final set of scriptures in Matthew 24 and verse 42 to 46. Matthew 24, verses 42 to 46. We're going to end back in Matthew 24, the outline that we have been talking through. But near the end of the chapter, it says in verse 42, watch, therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. Speaking to us as church members, we do not know. So when somebody tells you that they do know, what is it that Christ is saying? Who are we going to believe? Now, Christ left all this in the capable hands of the Father, in whose authority it remains. God is working with people and he's bringing them along, and others he is manipulating in this way and that to his end. When is that going to be? It's when he says everything is done and everything is in place. Then he will send the Son. We don't know, and neither does Christ. We might discern the seasons, and that's what we're talking about, but we do not know the exact time, and anybody who tells you that does not know what they're talking about. But know this, verse 43, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. You know, I look around and I see all this talk about this is the end of the world right now. It's the Mormons, it's Hagee, it's others, Khan, the Shemitah, and all this, and it's getting all kinds of momentum, and everybody's expecting the world to end right now. Everyone is expecting it. And what does he say here? He says it's coming at an hour that you do not expect. So I think we can safely say, based on the fact that everybody is ready for it to happen right now, is that it's not. And the fact is that these people don't have the truth anyway, that we've been talking about throughout this whole message, is that it will come, and only the ones that will know are the ones who have the truth, who are keeping the truth, the commandments of God, and all that entails. And then finally in verse 45, who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. You know, there we have it. That is what we're to be doing. And we will see this. Whenever things happen, it will make sense to us because we are discerning the signs of the times. And we, at that point, will be found so doing the word of God, living by every word in there and leaving none out. And if we do, then we do not have to worry about Christ coming, because we will be ready, we will be watching, we will be awake, and we will be ready for when he does indeed return.